Hello, this is Kim from Granny's Legacy, and one of our most frequently asked questions is, can you show us how to do a bullion knot? So today we're going to kind of dive into bullion knots, and there's several different ways to do or uses for a bullion knot, but we're just going to show a basic bullion knot first. So the first thing is your needle. That makes such a huge difference on doing a bullion knot. Katie and I often will tell you a chenille needle has a very large eye, but when you wrap around the shank for a bullion knot, it doesn't want to pull through that eye. So the eye will distort your knot. So number one, if you're having difficulty with bullion knots, change from a chenille needle into an embroidery needle. And this is the kind we love. There's another kind exactly like it called embroidery, and we use the size 7.
Yep.
It's a size 7 embroidery.
Here,
So that's
on that just 1 second.
That's what I have here is a size 7 embroidery. It comes in a pink package too that looks a lot like this, and it'll say embroidery size 7. Okay. So that's what we have here. If you're going to make really, really, really long ones, you're going to need a milliner's needle. And I like the very, very longest, which would be the size 9. So those are different kinds of needles. So if you're having trouble, be sure and change from a chenille needle into an embroidery needle. So I have an embroidery needle started here. I also, if you've noticed, I don't start with a huge length of thread. This is the longest I would ever use for a bullion knot. And I put my little knot on the end to start it. Now, Katie and I are a huge fan of thread wax, and here's our Granny's Threadtastic. However, when we do bullion knots, we do not wax. If we do, we would just wax very lightly, not very much at all. So to do a single straight bullion knot, and I'll show one as used here. Here is called our ice flowers. And all of these are bullion knots, just a straight bullion knot, and it gives such dimension to a project. So once you learn how to do bullion knots, it's going to really open up your world. I've made one here with 2 strands of thread, and it stands up and is a lot thicker. I'm going to do one beside it in 1 strand of thread so you can see the difference. So first of all, decide how long your bullion knot is going to be, and I'm going to decide about a 1/2 inch. So you come up, then go a 1/2 inch below that, or a 1/4, or however long your bullion knot wants to be. So that little nibble here, right there, is how big my bullion knot is going to be. So then I push the needle through, not all the way, but through, and I start wrapping around. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I kind of guesstimate. So I look at that nibble and I look how many wraps, and they look about they look about equal. So that's kind of how I guess. Maybe 1 more wrap would be the right size for that nibble. So I look at the nibble and I look at my wraps, and they look to be about the right size. Now, if you notice, when I was wrapping, I did not wrap tight. I just kind of wrapped around, and then I could take my finger and kind of roll it a little bit and make sure they're all even like a coil. And then all you do is gently pull your needle through, just gently. And when it gets through, when it gets almost through, it's going to flip over and flip backwards. And oftentimes when you flip it backwards, it doesn't look quite right yet. But when you go to pull it up, you can kind of use your finger again to roll it a little bit till it's exactly what you like, and then go back down in. So that is how simple a bullion knot is. So I could have actually, I think I would have liked to had 1 more wrap on there. So you can do one of 2 things. You could just cheat and put 1 more wrap on it. Just go up and down and add 1 more wrap, or if you need 2 more wraps or whatever, you can kind of cheat, and as long as you don't pull it too tight, you can add 1 more to fill up that space. And kind of, maybe we want 1 more on there. So there's a lot of little ways you can make this work. You could have cut it off and tried again, or you can try to work with what you have. but that's a straight bullion knot. Now I'm going to do one more so you can see how it's done. But there, I've wrapped a couple times around there to make it full. So you'd put a little knot on the back, however you like to knot. I would not go from one to the other. I kind of tend to knot each one separately because you don't want to kind of pull it up too tight. So when you go to your next bullion knot, you probably want to start again. So I'm going to do one more, so just so you can see how that worked. Maybe I'll do a big long one this time. So let's say I want a big long bullion knot. Let's say this long. So it's down, up, and then down and up right where you came up to begin with, just like that. Now that's quite a long one, so you're going to have to get your needle pushed through and just start making coils on that, just wrapping around. I always wrap counterclockwise. I do not know why I do it that way. It's just the way I do, I guess. So I'm going to pack them on pretty tight because I've got a kind of a big nibble there. Okay, so you can see we got a lot of them on there, and they look nice and even. It looks about the same size as that nibble I started out with. So I pull through, and just it kind of lays back on itself. Oh wow, that one turned out absolutely beautiful. Look at that. It's so fun when you see one that turns out so perfect, and you could always take when you're done, just wiggle over it to make sure everything's nice and neat. Look at that. How fun is that? A beautiful bullion knot. So I'll show you a couple different things I've done. Here I've done to make kind of a rose, and when you take your nibble, you just wrap more than really needs to be to make it curl. So now we'll talk about if you'd like to do a curved bullion knot. And I've got a rose started here. Let's add another petal to the rose. So I'm going to kind of go inside here. I think that would be right. And so now I've got this 3/8 inch nibble or whatever, but I want to put more wraps on. And then really to make it straight, I want it to curl. So I'm going to start wrapping. And roses are fun to do with a variegated thread because it almost looks like a normal rose. So I'm going to put a few more wraps on than that would dictate because I want it to curl. I want it to curve out. So I'm going to pull that up and pull it around and push it down in right there. And you just added a curve. So it has to have more wraps if it's going to curve. And sometimes if you want the curve to stay in a specific place, you don't want it to pull up or something, you can come up and add one more little stitch to it kind of to hold it into place. And it just kind of goes in with the rest of them and it hides. So there are some bullion knot samples. Okay, now let's try to make a really, really long bullion knot. Sometimes you need one that's like 2 inches long or so. So let's make a really long one. So have a milliner's needle here, and you can get these are 3 or 4 inches long. So if you need a really long bullion knot, you can get one that's really long. And sometimes it helps just pinch up your fabric and get it out of the way. And then you can start your wraps. Now remember, not too tight, just coil it around there. Keep going and going. Listen to some soft music or loud music or wild music. And you just keep wrapping and wrapping until you get enough coiled to be equal to that bite you took out. So I'm going to do a few more, I think, because that was a pretty long bite. Now these kind of got thick down here, so I'm going to kind of pull my needle and get them, just push your finger along and get them evened out, and then you can just push it through. Same as a shorty. You can make a really long one, and it folds back. And then, so this is kind of not coiled as nice as I'd like. But remember what I said, you can just take your finger and roll on it and roll on it and roll on it and pull on it until you get it to be just like you like it. So that should have had more wraps, but you'll find with practice. There, see how it's rolling up just perfect?
At this point, too, you can just take your needle and continue to wrap going under the thread over and over and over again.
Over and over, too. Okay. So that's a very long bullion knot. And that with some practice will turn out as beautiful as this one. So, yes, like Katie said, we can come back up and just start coiling again and finish that one. But you can just take your finger and roll it until you get your coils just perfect. How's that? That's looking pretty nice. Okay, so let's show a couple examples in our workup, some bullion knots that we've used. So once again, the ice flowers were straight. And here's a really good example of a straight bullion knot that was made. And then I went back and tried to seal it in place, but look how long it was. It's very long, and this is a little bit shorter one. So that walking stick was made with a big long bullion knot. And we've made it kind of crookedy a little bit because the stick is a little bit crookedy. You might want to make yours be exactly straight. Here is a good example of the Pico bullion knots, I call them. So what we did is we made curved ones and then put a bead in the center of each one, and it makes lovely picos. And here's a case where you want to go back and put one little stitch in each one to hold it in place, so you have it so it doesn't curl back up over the top of the bead, but holds in place. So lots of examples of bullion knots and how fun they add to your pieces of wool applique. So we hope you enjoyed this session on making bullion knots. Thanks for joining us.